Gotta get the microphone on. Hello, Hannah. How are you doing? And also, Huggin, welcome in. Hopefully you guys are doing well. You gotta go. Yeah, I figured you were. I thought you were like leaving this morning for something. It's nice to see you though. Got here for 1 second. Snuck in a little second day stream today. Hey, Science, how are you doing? Welcome in. I got the auto notifications whirling up now. Hopefully everybody over there is doing well. I saw it this morning. You sent me a message that said you got some samples from me, the slides I sent out. I also sent out some stuff to Studio Cornix this week. So just pumping out Diatom stuff everywhere. Yeah, so I just had a little bit of extra time today, and I still needed to get around to looking at these samples that I collected with my students in the Chinook Wildlife Preserve over the weekend, about 2 weekends ago. And I'm just taking some pictures so that the students who are working on diatoms from the lakes have some nice high quality images from that subset. Samshung, hello, welcome in. Best part of working from home is catching the streams. Thanks for saying that. Actually, this is kind of interesting. I zoomed in to look at this diatom here. This is a navicula, boat shape in outline. If we zoom in and look at the striae, you'll see that they are lineolate. In other words, they're made up of a series of more or less parallel lines that are roughly in the same orientation as the raphe. And these ones are radiant. In other words, they point outward from the center in all directions in the middle of the diatom, and then become parallel as we move towards the ends of the valve, towards the apex. You can see the striae, which are the lines that you see, or the stripes that you can see here, roughly start to straighten out, and as most typical navicula do, the striae then become convergent and they point towards the apex as we get a little bit closer towards it. This is the part that I thought was interesting, is this stuff that's in the background just laying here in the slide. Not a diatom. Those are pieces of chrysophyte. Those are chrysophyte scales. They're like fish scales, basically. They have little overlapping scales. So here's one, here's another. So for chrysophytes are a type of golden or golden brown algae. And we find the chrysophyte cysts more frequently than the scales. So those are kind of unusual for me to find. They're common in lake systems. I just don't often see them. Some samples more than others, I guess. This looks like maybe an cyanopsis. I'm gonna just scout around a little. This is a sample that I collected. Let's see. This was from a wetland that was just right next to the actual. These are old coal pits that have been dug out, and they fill them in with water so that they don't have to manage the environmental damage that's done from the mining. And so they're old strip mines, and then people come there and fish out of the old strip mines. I suppose at their own risk. I don't think the water is necessarily dangerous. But I don't know that I would ever want to drink out of something that people were mining out of, or eat anything that lived in something people were mining out of. It seems like a bad plan. but maybe it's fine. Generally speaking, I think they bring fish in and put them in the environment so people can fish there. I think they're stocked ponds. And in that sense, the fish probably came from someplace else that was contaminated by something else in Indiana that they transported in. So I don't know. Maybe some of these they're old enough that maybe they've got their own communities in them now. But so there's diatoms all over the slide here, everywhere. Cliff, how are you doing? Welcome in. Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth between my SEM and chat as I usually do. And this is a little bit like a working stream. It's the same stuff I was looking at Wednesday, but I didn't get to all the stubs. And so I kind of wanted to explore some of the other diatoms that were present in these samples, but they're from the same systems, like adjacent systems. So these are a wetland area that was basically next to the lakes that we were looking at material from on Wednesday. I have those on this the stub here as well on the carousel. So we could rotate around to them. But there's a lot of diatoms here, and so there's a lot going on, and I'm just trying to characterize a little bit of everything that I see, so I'm not that concerned about which one of the stubs I'm on necessarily. There is some plankton. Most of these diatoms are benthic, so the cymbellas, these naviculas, all of these little things in here. There's a bunch of monoraphid diatoms and some of these long skinny things, mostly benthic, but this thing is Asterianella formosa. That's a plankton, and we saw that in the water column. Here's another one of Asterianella formosa, and this round thing, is a centric diatom, a Lindavia, probably intermedia, as something like intermedia. So this round one is the same thing, Lindavia intermedia. That's a Nitzia. There's Asterianella formosa down here. This thing that looks like a Q-tip, basically, it has little rounded ends, is Asterianella formosa. Asterianella formosa is usually a nutrient indicator. There's this little S-shaped diatom right here. We don't see a lot of S-shaped diatoms. It's sigmoid in outline, and the Rhaphius sigmoid is Gyrosigma. So they occur, they're just not all that common. But just to give you some idea of the general sort of shapes of diatoms: round, boat shape, stick shape, club shape, these banana shaped ones, all different shapes for diatoms, ovals. This thing here that looks like a person, a miniature person, also a type of diatom. It's got a curvy outline. Let's zoom in and look at one of these. So they look kind of boring if I don't focus it very well, but there's actually kind of a lot of detail. Hopefully I can bring out by getting into focus. The center area has some dots, and the outside edges have some dots and some little holes in them. So if we were to zoom in, you'd see them a lot more clearly. These are the little holes I was talking about. This is a external expression of the Rimiportula, and these little pits are associated with a process as well. It's the Mantophotoportula, and then these little tiny dots that you see all over the surface out here, and they come into rows, are the areolae that ultimately are striae for the organism. If we can find an internal view of one of these, so this is the external view, it's like we're looking at the outside of the diatom cell. This is the outside of its cell wall. Here's an internal view. So there's an external view there and an internal view here. You can sort of tell how I can see that they're inside versus outside. That's an internal view. This is an external, internal. So you can see internal views are going to have these sort of dark middle areas and a bright outline around the outside edge. That's because the SEM is reflecting off of the outer lip. So think of it like a frisbee. If you were looking at a frisbee from a distance, you probably would be able to tell whether you were looking at the inside cupped side of it or the outside of it, the domed side of it, pretty easily. And the same thing with these organisms. They're basically frisbee shapes. And so if it's all solid color, basically we're probably looking at the outside of that frisbee-shaped diatom, and this is the inside view. So what's nice about that is in the SEM we can see the detail of the inside and the outside views, and the insides are a little bit more interesting to look at on some level, usually. So what we see, if we just look at the central part of the diatom, is a whole bunch of little clover-shaped objects. Almost all of them have 3 sides. Some of them are 2-sided. These are valve face photoportula. So we'll zoom in and look at them in a second when I'm done blabbing. And then these radiant lines that you see sort of produced by sets of dots, those are areolae creating stria. So you see that the valve face photoportula actually are in alignment with the areolae. They're in the rows. They're just a different structure. And then out here, these 2 little ear-shaped or lip-shaped things are the rimoportula. So when I pointed it to that big opening that was on the valve face, this is the process that's on the inside of the diatom. And that hole is what it looks like on the outside. So just a hole on the outside, and the inside it has a sort of lip shape. And then around the outside edge, you can see these indentations here. They have a structure kind of like these. These are mantle photoportula. They have a similar shape, a similar structure to them, but they're on these sort of pillars, or what we call costae, or ribs, like a thickened piece of silica that comes all the way up through the valve and makes the these sort of chamber-like structures. So there's one here that's thicker, and one here that's thicker, and one here that's thicker. And so each of these is present, and there's one on every one of these bigger, thicker costae. And then the chamber that's created as a result of that is alveolar chamber. And you can see these have some 2 little lines usually inside of them. It's actually sort of a forked set of little tiny mini versions of the costae that run along the valve as well. This is a pretty interesting internal structure for something on the outside that doesn't look this busy. Let's zoom in and look at one of these, the strutted processes, the valve face photoportula. So if it's perfectly preserved, which this may not be, these are going to show up as a central hole. You can see the center hole in each one of these little triangular shaped things. A sort of a cowl-like structure, or a collar-like structure that goes around the outside edge on these, and then it has a triangular shaped piece that fits over top of it. So there's this component around the outside, like bumpers, these triangular things that go on the top of those, and then a hole in the center with a thickened circle. And what you can't see is that underneath each of these little triangular pieces, these are like a covering, there's another little hole associated with them. So there's a center hole, and these 2 little or 3 little satellite pores that are around the outside edges, a sort of a collar that goes around the outside of that, and then a triangular shaped covering that goes over top of them. So that's sort of the structure of the shape. And those differ from the simple areolae, which just basically look like a salt and pepper shaker head. They just have a bunch of little openings, which we should be able to see here if I can get it perfectly in focus, but they may not be very clear. Sometimes they're just covered with some stuff. And also it helps if I sometimes change the beam intensity so that we can see stuff with a little bit more detail. I can kind of just barely make out a few holes around the margins, but they may not be very clear to you. You can see them. There's a sort of a subset here in the middle. I'm just playing with the focus a little bit to try to get them to the point where we could actually see the structure there. They may be slightly covered, or they like with a clay or organic component, or they may also be partially dissolved. That's creating sort of an issue. I know that I'll get it a whole lot better than that, but we can kind of zoom out, and then I'll just take a picture from this height, and then you'll be able to see some of the detail. When I slow the beam down, all of the resolution picks up on all of it. You can see there's a little bit of like junk on them, but you can still see some sort of openings in these. They look like little salt and pepper shaker heads. They're not very interesting relative to these other openings. Here you can see the really clear triangular covering over the top, the hole that goes in the center for the larger central hole, and then there would be little holes. If this cover piece was broken off, you'd see a little hole here, a little hole here, and a little hole here associated with these. These are what we call the satellite pores. The central pore and the satellite pores then make up what we call the photoportula. That's just a special process that the diatom has in the cell wall. So because their cell walls are made out of silica, we can see all of these details. I'm going to boost this to 6. It's okay. And then do a little bit of the brightness and contrast adjustments. Okay. Huggin, how many microscopic animals are usually present in a sample? For these systems, it's countless animals. If you mean like total number, like we collected some plankton toes from these systems, and the entire net was just filled with copepods and cladocera and daphnia of all different types, and bosmina, chidoras, and so like the zooplankton, the animals, which I'm assuming what you're talking about when you say animals, microscopic animals that are present. I mean, there's millions of them in a sample that we collect because they get concentrated. And if we're talking about how many species we see, it's probably something like, from the microscopic animal perspective, we probably see maybe 25 different species, something like that. I don't know. I wasn't categorizing all of them. Do insects eat diatoms? Yeah, aquatic insects definitely eat diatoms. Undoubtedly, that happens. Just lower that a little, and I'm going to just zoom out a little bit. We can see the detail. We can't really see what's going on with the rest of the valve where I was. Also, welcome back, Aki. And then I will take a picture, and then I can come hang out and chat for a little bit. What am I looking for? Oh, these are just some pictures for students from my Lakes and Wetlands class, Anna, where just browsing around in what's in the sample, and I wanted to categorize what's there for them a little bit, so that the students who are looking at diatoms, if they find these in their core samples, we also collected some cores. If we find some material in their core samples, they'll have some modern references for them. Just getting nonstop messages on my phone for some reason. Let's see. I'm wearing a t-shirt. It's spring finally. Yeah, it's like 80 degrees today and tomorrow. 70 to 80 degrees outside. So I've been riding my bike in. It rained a little bit, but I got in before it rained. And then I think all of this week it's 70s and 80s finally. So we're out of the 45 and dreary sort of late winter phase for a little bit at least. Do I use diatoms as my desktop background? Yes, absolutely. I use my own SEM images as my background, desktop backgrounds, and I then provide them to people. If you go to the Discord, you can basically have any of the images that I alter and download more or less higher resolution versions of them. Let's see. What is the nutritional value of a diatom? I don't know specifically how to answer that question, Belinda, but if you were to compare diatoms to green algae and cyanobacteria, which is basically the most common bottom of the food web type of materials for organisms, if you're a snail or aquatic insect, your preference is for diatoms. They don't make toxins, for one, so that separates them from things like cyanobacteria. And so, like, if you're trying to look for something that's digestible, that has a high energy value for you, that doesn't require you to have to compensate for something that you're eating, typically speaking, diatoms are a better food source for fish than, or anything, than green algae by a little bit. And then typically the energy value for cyanobacteria is quite low, because they're usually filled with toxins and they're kind of nasty, and they're challenging for organisms to eat on purpose. So if something had a choice, not all organisms make choices, but if they had a choice, diatoms are usually the preferred food for organisms. So at the bottom of the food web in aquatic systems, pretty much across the board, diatoms and any of the golden brown algae are probably a little bit better for organisms to eat than green algae. Definitely better than cyanobacteria. Some of those things are a little bit more available depending on the system, so organisms basically have to eat whatever they can find, and some of them aren't very particular. They just graze and they digest stuff. And so some diatoms may be easier to digest or easy to consume than other diatoms for organisms. Have I played Spore? I played an early version of Spore, I think, when it first came out, but I didn't play it for very long. Matt Shandy, first time chatter, hello. I wonder how many electrons is that per square micrometer at that resolution? I'm sure that information is tracked somewhere on this machine. I don't ever look at it that way. But it doesn't give us the sort of density of electrons that it's recovering typically. What it gives us is the absorbed currents, so how much absorbed current is occurring. And I suspect you could calculate it pretty easily if you were into that sort of thing. I don't, a lot of people ask questions about the SEM from an engineering point of view, and I'm not an engineer. So, I mean, I know it's a fascinating engineering piece of equipment, but I don't know every detail about, I'm a paleoecologist, not a engineer. I use the tool. It's like asking me how a microwave works. I mean, I put stuff in and I push the buttons and it makes my food hot. I know what's a good choice and what's a bad choice for the numbers of things I need to put in to get the food out. But the rest of it's kind of a black box. I mean, I understand how it works. I could explain how it works well enough, but when you get down to the details of the engineering aspects of it, that's not my specialization. So, and not that I'm not curious about it, just that I kind of am busy with all the other things that I do. So I can try to answer questions as best I can, but if you get out in the weeds and stuff, I'm not going to be able to help. This is normal for, people are curious, and I don't want to suppress people's curiosity. You should ask questions if you have them. So don't take that as don't ask me questions, just don't expect me to know the answer is what I'm trying to get at from that. because there's lots of things that, I'm an expert at, diatoms, and lots of things I'm not an expert at, which include engineering. So just as a caveat. So this is outside of the same organism we were just looking at, and I'm going to try to get it just into focus, and then I'm going to fix the brightness to the best of my ability. It's a little over brightened, and it's hard to image right now because I have the beam intensity set at 5, and I need to make it, I probably need to raise it up a little to improve the quality of the image, so just get back to that, hang on. So I can kind of get it into a little bit better focus everywhere. Let's zoom in on this. It's the same thing. This is Lindavia, probably intermedia. These are the areolae. On the inside, these things were covered with, on the center, they were covered with those little salt and pepper shakers, some of them. You would not be able to clearly tell from just from the outside view. So I'll just zoom out to the central area and slow the beam down a little bit so you can see what I mean. In the center, when we were looking at that inside view of the diatom, we saw a whole bunch of clover-shaped things, and if you were looking at this diatom from the outside, it's really difficult to distinguish which one of these openings are valve face photoportula and which one are just the areolae. You might be able to tell by the diameter of them, so some of them are a little bit bigger, and that just like by the narrowest little bit, but so other than just trying to figure out from what we saw, there seemed to be fewer valve face photoportula in the center and more around the margins. You really couldn't easily tell from the shape which they were. But these bigger holes that you can see here and here, those are the things that had those little like ear-like or lip-like structures on them. These are the rhimoportula openings on the outside. And they are always on a thickened costi. So there's a very thick costi here with a hole at the end of it, and the same thing's true over here, a very thick costi with a hole at the end of it. And that is the pattern that would allow you to easily identify those. Usually if there's two of them in Lindavia, they are diametric, they're on opposite sides of the valve. And if there are 3 of them, they usually are at 120 degree angles, and if there's 4 of them, they're at 90 degree angles, because they're usually on opposite sides of the organism. So we have it in a nice clear focus. These are those things that we saw that were sort of jutting in from the outside on a slightly thicker costi. At the end of each one of those, there was a sort of like bump sticking out. These are the marginal or mantle photoportula, and then the structure that's here that's between them is the part that was creating the alveolar chamber, and you can see that it extends inside. There's these like long, slightly skinnier costi that come up and bifurcate right here, right before the little window that we were looking into on the inside. So there was always 2 little forks that were between the little open window that we saw. And that's a normal pattern for Lindavia, to have that bifurcation in the striae or the costi as you move towards the outside margin, right as they pass between the marginal photoportula. So here's the center of the diatom. These are those ear-like things that we saw. You can see these little tiny sort of pits, sort of structures, which are the mantle photoportula from the outside view. It's kind of nice to be able to see the inside and then the outside of the organism. So in real life, when this organism is living, we just would be able to see outside to outside. There would be another valve, on both sides of the diatom. So it would be like a pokeball or a petri dish or 2 frisbees where you put the cup shapes together, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and take this picture, even here, as an outside view of this diatom, so we have some record of it. Yeah, it's definitely a main food source. Can humans eat diatoms? You can eat them. I don't know that there's any benefit for you, Haki. I don't think that will help you. You know, yes, you could put them in your mouth. They're dust-sized, so you'd need to eat a lot of them. And I don't think that they're big enough that you could taste them. But when people ask me what do they taste like, I always say they taste like Smarties. So you would enjoy it if that were the case, because Smarties are delicious. Electrons per pixel would be cool too. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of electrons that have to get to the sensor from each pixel. So the number would be quite high, Anakim. Maybe I could have an engineer on stream to chat someday. I suppose so. I don't have any engineers that use the scanning electron microscope, and none of them are specialists in the scanning electron microscope except for the maintenance guy. And I don't think that the maintenance guy would be able to tell you how many electrons per square per pixel there are. He knows how to, you know, fix it. I don't know that he knows the, you know, I would have to get like somebody from Tescan here, you know, as an operator that designed it or something to get an answer to that. Yeah, I mean, it would be fun to have them here. Just, it's like, it's not practical, probably. If they were watching the stream, you know, if I could get Tescan to recognize the fact that I am streaming on Twitch with their instrument, and maybe it would be cool for one of them to be here, then maybe we could do it. For whatever reason, they don't care. I tried sending them notes through Twitter before, and I don't think they answer their Twitter account. It does just like one post in like 4 years. So it wasn't really a question anyway, but oh, it's all right. I mean, it was a question, but maybe not one I could easily answer. Do you know of any introduction to Diatom book geared towards non-academics? Oh, you don't need a book for that. You can just go to diatoms.org, and you can click around and learn about general things about diatoms there. That's a website. It's free. If you wanted to learn a little bit more about, you know, diatoms in general, there are books. We have like a textbook kind of thing, and I'm an author in it on the chapter about how to use diatoms to reconstruct lake level. That's called Diatoms, the Applications. I think that book costs like $80 or something, so it's not really like a cheap book that you can just pick up. It's meant as to be a textbook for people who want to learn about, you know, diatoms in depth. I don't know that you necessarily need to have that sort of a resource. Probably just going to diatoms.org and poking around and reading through web pages would be suitable for a person who's just curious. So I would recommend that first, and then you know, keep it cheap for people. And then I have some little guidebooks that are kind of useful and helpful that are, you know, relatively small that people have produced. And if you're really interested, I could probably dig one of those up, and I might be able to dig it up as a PDF and sneak it onto the Discord or something like that. You know, just so people have it. You know, I also have little pamphlets that we used to give out to students when they first joined the lab that like sort of gave them some general characteristics for the different genera, but they're really kind of dated. I feel like the web page does a better job of that. Aki, is there any place on Earth where there are not any diatoms? Any place that there isn't sunlight probably won't have diatoms because they are algae, and for the most part they are autotrophic. So there are instances of heterotrophic diatoms, but very rare. And they wouldn't be in a permanently dark environment. So if you went to the bottoms of the ocean, you'd find them, but you'd find them as fossils from raining out from, you know, cadavers from above. Any place that's dark, like people kind of wonder sometimes, oh, if I look through my well water, would I find diatoms? And I would say probably not, unless your well is open and sunlight is hitting the sidewalls and you're scraping the sidewalls, because you need light. You're not going to find them in groundwater or you know, anything that's in perpetual darkness, it's not going to be enough light for diatoms. But to get at your question more generally, they're otherwise cover the earth anywhere there's water. So places that are very dry, that have no water, there aren't very many places like that. They probably are not common. They may still be present in the soils in those places. But generally speaking, that's not a, you know, if you went to the Atacama Desert where, you know, they get a couple centimeters a year at best, or millimeters a year of moisture, probably not going to find a ton of diatoms in that kind of environment. There may be some in the soils, but not as a dominant organism. In aquatic systems, they're pretty much everywhere, but you know, they need silica. Phosphorus, nitrogen, and silica are their primary, and carbon are their primary nutrients that they require. And it's pretty easy to find silica in terrestrial environments, so places where, you know, you're near the land, or you're on the land, or you're in a lake. It's pretty easy to find silica, generally speaking, in that environment. But if you go out into the really deep ocean, and you're very far away from land, there's a high probability that you won't be near a lot of silica. And so you probably won't find a lot of diatoms in those environments. Even though there's sunlight in open water, and there may be even, you know, phosphorus or nitrogen present, really all of the nutrients become a little bit more sparse as you move away from the continental margins. So, you know, that's an area where you might not see them very frequently. Hang on, I need to think while I rotate. Something like this. I rotated it out of my field of view. There it is. Spun it a little too far. This is a Pinularia, I think. It could be Calanese, I guess. That's the raphe that I'm focused on right now. That is how diatoms crawl around. What you'll notice is that the valve face doesn't have those lines going across in rows, but it does have striae, or striae-like structures. They are very, very small holes on the valve face, which is why I suggested Pinularia or Calanese as the genus. They have alveolar striae or alveolate striae, which have these very little holes that run along the surface. So kind of like the salt and pepper shaker heads that we saw on the areolae of that Lindavia. This thing, sort of cigar shape, and then has a raphe that runs down the center. So that's different, a structural difference between this and the round one that we were looking at. And this is a benthic diatom. It lives on the bottom, and it uses this slot to crawl around with. So this is part of their motility system. And then the striae are mostly used for interacting with their environment to get nutrients and that sort of thing. You can just barely see there's some holes, some little tiny holes associated with each of these like dark bands that are running along the length here. These are the striae and costi. So I will take that picture. In the center, yeah. In the center of the Earth, we definitely wouldn't have any. Once you get below the Earth's surface, a little bit, like you can get some that live in soils, but they live on the top, not deep in the Earth. Cliff Alistair McLean says, in Germany you can buy food-grade diatomaceous earth as a dietary supplement. It is of course, I think you mean supposed to do miracles for your health. It tastes like chalk. Um, I don't think that that is probably not. That is probably just diatomite. That is not probably got the chloroplasts still in it. So it is probably just diatomaceous earth that you would put in your garden to keep insects away. Food grade probably doesn't mean anything, because you're just stuffing bits and pieces of rock in your mouth, basically. It's just the skeletons. Those are just the siliceous skeletons of diatoms, and they don't have any nutritional value for humans. So whatever miracles they think they're going to do, humans don't require silica, and that's all you would be stuffing in your face if you put diatomaceous earth in your mouth. That is literally just silicon dioxide that you're sticking in your mouth, and it's equivalent to eating sand, like for what your body would get out of it, which is to say nothing. It's going to go in your mouth and into your body, and then come out of your body the way it came in. Yes, the silica packets that say "do not eat this" are also, they contain diatoms. Those are often composed of diatoms, and so as an example, when you buy something electronic or like a backpack, and it has something inside to absorb moisture, those are silica gels, are diatomaceous earth sometimes, or mostly composed of diatomaceous earth with maybe something else in them. And they're about as nutritional for you as eating it right out of the bag or sprinkling on your food. I do not recommend it. So can we make semiconductors out of them? The microchip shortage is over. I don't know what people use for as a source for the silica in semiconductors, but I don't think that you need to struggle to find sand, and I probably would just stick with sand. Not that diatomaceous earth is expensive, but it's probably a little less abundant than sand, or a lot less abundant than sand. Just pure sand would probably be a better choice for making something like that. I suppose you could make them, though. I sometimes build stuff in my wood shop. I craft things with wood, with hardwoods, and also with whatever woods. I build furniture for my family, and bird feeders and whatever. But I also sometimes make musical instruments, and I made these musical shakers where you could put like lentils and rice and whatever in them to make like noise, and for music noise. And I sent them off to one of my friends. Asymmetrical Soul has one of them, and he was like, "Oh, you should have filled it with diatomaceous earth." And there's a use for it that I hadn't thought of. We could put it inside musical shakers instead of sand or rice. It might make a nice noise. So if I build some more musical shakers, I may make some special Diatom musical shakers. I feel like that would be a great connection between my science life and my, crafting artist sort of life. It would be pretty funny to make those, and then unique, right? Nobody has a musical shaker with diatoms in it, because why would you? But also, why wouldn't you? I guess is my take on that. It sounds like an okay plan. But look at this one. This is super ornate. This is Gomphanema. This is Gomphanema truncaculum. Gomphanema. This one. It's almost the same as the one that's in the little picture in the corner now. Sand seems to be rare. I often read of industries that struggle to get the right kind of sand for their purpose. It's possible. It's possible. I'm not saying don't do it, but I bet it's still... Sand is probably, like, pure sand is probably a little bit more abundant than just diatomite. But, again, not an engineer. So I don't know whether that's practical or not to use diatomite. People use it for all kinds of things. So why not? Maybe it would make some pretty cool microchips, but don't use all of it. I need some of it still for my research purposes. So let's see. I want to rotate it like 30 degrees. Let's try it. See if I can rotate it without it spinning completely off of the stage. No, it's completely off again. Ha! I did a pretty good guess though. I rotate the stage around because I want to try to maximize the size of the diatom, so it's going corner to corner basically. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I just want it to be better than it was, which is like pointing at some not good angle. Here we go. This one's slightly dissolved, but you can see these sort of C-shaped openings the areolae have, and pretty ornate surface. And then this is the raphe for the Gomphanema. They have a raphe, and on this end, the foot pole end, oh, you can't see it very well, but it has sort of a salt and pepper shaker bottom to it down here, which is the apical pore field, or the pore field on the apex or the end of it, which is used to create a stalk. And then it lives attached to things like rocks and plants. And then on this end of the diatom is the head pole, and this one is actually slightly tilted upwards, so we can see kind of over the edge of it. So this is the valve face. This is the mantle, or the edge of the diatom. And then you can see a girdle band and maybe another valve face on the opposite side. So we have the whole frustule here, I think. Yeah, I think so. And let's put it on speed 7, and I'm going to change the brightness and contrast. It's a little bright up here at the top. In fact, I think our last image was also a little bright, but I just went with it. I don't need perfect images, as aren't for publication. They're for fun. Well, for me it's fun. For my students it's for their project. And once it balances the brightness, then I'll take a picture and I can come back and chat with people for a little bit more. It looks already like it's going to be a good one. It's nice and solid in the dark areas. And I think we can clearly see there's another valve on the other side here. There's a girdle band that's holding the two valves together that runs along the outside edge between the two pieces, the valve faces. This will be fine. Okay. Collect the picture. And then all these pictures, I'll probably colorize some of them and post some of them in the Discord and post some of them on the Instagram page. And eventually they'll end up like these things that are here below me that are the colorized images. Michael Learning, you got a bell. Welcome in. Would diatoms in your garden make your plants grow better? No. Probably not. But it may deter organisms from eating your plants. So ants and most insects and slugs basically don't like to cross through diatomite because it cuts their limbs or causes them discomfort or sticks to them because they have these tiny little intricate skeletons. And so people sometimes put diatomite in their gardens or around pest places to try to deter those organisms from going either into their house or into their gardens. It could have negative consequences if the ants are pollinators. If there's something that destroys your garden, then maybe it has a consequence. Or ants sometimes facilitate other organisms that might be pollinators. So it just depends. I don't broadly recommend people use diatomite in their gardens. If you have a lot of slugs are usually, create problems for people. So you might use it under those circumstances. But How's it going, Michael Learning? How you doing? Uh, I didn't. I'm so lazy now because everything just gets shouted out and notified to chat the moment someone comes in. But if you're not following science here in the chat, or Michael Learning here in the chat, and you like science, everything is smooth. Yeah. So you should give them a follow. My little thing programs and shouts out those people because I feel like they are people you should follow. I follow them, and I recommend them to people. So do that, especially if you like science. It's a very pretty Gomphanema. Yeah, it's a little dissolved, but I like the ornate sort of external structure of the areolae. So it shouted you out before you even spoke. How would it know to do that? Oh, you got a random one. Oh, there's also a thing that randomly shouts out friends. So any friend of the channel. I have some people that are microscope streamers, so like Science and you, and Pacific Plankton and OpenSat. And then it also cycles through and shouts out some of my musician friends. So yeah, it was just a coincidence. It randomly cycles through and picks either an artist, a music streamer, a science streamer, or a microscope streamer. Those are the categories. And then some people actually fit into more than one. So like OpenSet fits into every one of those categories. But it just picks from a pile of things, and then in that pile there's a collection of people that it selects from, just randomly shouts them out. So even if you don't talk, sometimes you get shouted out in here. I have sort of two different things running in Leorin board that do that. But it's a way for me to just sort of try to help my friends, get some follows, get some people to pay attention to them that I want people to see them and see what they do. Also, trunculatum. Also, I think that if you weren't here at the very beginning of the stream, I have been collaborating, I guess. I don't know if it's a collaboration on my end. All I do is my normal stuff, but I have a music producer slash music streamer friend, Mel IM, and you'll see her name get cycled through or whatever occasionally. But she's been building background music for me so that I don't have to use Pretzel Rock. And that's an advantage for me in a lot of ways because, one, I really like the sort of personalization. She goes through and watches my videos and then kind of builds the music around some of the videos that I have and uses some of the sound bites and clips. So we haven't had any of those that she's finished yet, but she's working on them. And so those will be in the background for maybe my light microscope streams or whenever I have music playing in the background. And so that's super, super cool to me to have somebody focus on what I'm doing and just enjoy making background music for me so that I could play it. I know OpenSet for a while said he was going to try to build some stuff that people could use for streaming with his music. Oh, what's happened? Maiko gave a gift sub to Aki. There you go. Very nice. And now you get a bell when you first talk. What other tools do you use besides the electron microscope? I have in my microscope lab, and also at home, I have a Leica DRM 2500, and it's a upright light microscope, transmitted light microscope, research grade, and I have a set of those that I use. And for streaming, I'll do sometimes in the evening streams where I will do from light microscope. We'll look at either slides that have been prepared, or I look at live organisms from ponds, systems where I collect stuff, either algae or plants or whatever. Anything in the water column is fair game. And then I also have a stereo microscope, a very nice stereo microscope in my microscope lab, And I've used that to stream things like insects before. Or like we looked at the Brood X cicadas, and we looked at butterfly wings and mostly insects because they're in that sort of scale. Hey, Chris L. Cox, hello. You're not in my list of people to automatically shout out, but I can shout you out manually like a caveman. If you don't follow Chris L. Cox, you maybe give him a follow as well. They play music, and they do, I think, and they do a lot of 3D modeling and stuff, and build art for streamers. It's pretty cool. Yeah, so 2021 to have to shout something out? No. Ah, you shook me up when you got me back to algae colors. Very good, Pragmatic. You didn't get the purple. Purple's the winning color. But you should give Chris a follow as well. Highly recommend. I follow them. I think I saw him streaming from Blender the other day, doing a little Blender work, which is cool. I play around with Blender. I've only used it when I'm building furniture, and I need to figure out the dimensions of things before I start. A lot of times when I'm doing woodworking, I don't plan. I just wing it. And I built like cutting boards and whatever else. If Anna's still in the channel, I built Anna, like, she asked me for a spice rack, if I could build a spice rack, and I built her a little spice rack, like a custom spice rack made out of hardwood. I don't do any planning. I just put it together as I go. I kind of wing it, and I know enough about what I want it to look like that I don't usually sketch it out or sketch it up. But when I'm building furniture and it's expensive wood, I usually want to make sure that I know what I'm doing and what I'm gonna put, where I'm gonna put the pieces and stuff like that. So for those, I will go into Blender and actually build 3D models of the furniture that I'm putting together. My daughter wants me, and my wife actually wants me to build something for our daughter's room. She's got like a bay window, and she wants me to build like a bench seat with a shelf underneath of it, so she could sit in the window and read, and all the books would be underneath the shelf, you know, underneath the part that you sit on, and then they'll get some sort of custom cushions or something for it. And so that's on my to-do list for, I don't know, when classes end maybe, or we're redoing our daughter's room, so so my wife has repainted 3 of the walls, and then we're going to put up some wallpaper. Maybe that'll happen this weekend, I don't know. But it's on the to-do list, and then I've got to figure out how to build this thing for the inside. I probably will do that in Blender. So it's not a skill set that I have that's very well developed, but I tinker with it. So I know that Science, if you're still here, I know you do a lot of like modeling. I don't know what tool you use for modeling though. I don't think I've seen streams where, I know you do streams where you do the 3D modeling, but I didn't actually see what tool you use for those in particular. So I'm sort of curious. I like Blender because it was free, and you can get tutorials to learn how to do basic stuff pretty easily. So that was my primary motivation. I just wanted to be able to like sketch something up and not screw it up when I went to actually make it. So I built my daughter a piano stand for a keyboard, not an actual piano, but like a keyboard stand for piano keyboard. And I used it for that. Think about what else I've used it for. It's a nice tool. A little complicated for what I needed, but but it worked well enough once I figured out what I was doing. So let's get a picture of this Navicula, and then maybe we'll move to another slide. So outside view of a Navicula, we saw the raphe. It has little like shepherd's crook kind of ends on the middle parts. For this species, this is probably like Navicula radiosa. Not positive about that, but it's kind of in that group. There's a lot of Naviculas, so I could get it wrong pretty easily, but I would start with radiosa and then sort of build outward from there. Navicula are usually defined by having sort of a boat shape, like this one, sort of boat shaped, and then never really considered blander for CAD. Hi peeps, not the brain. How are you doing? Not the brain. Does that mean you're pinky? We're hanging out. We're looking at diatoms, which is something that we do. Not usually on a Friday afternoon, but the class that I normally teach in this time slot is being taught by a guest lecturer today, and oh, nice! I picked it up, and that means I have a little bit of free time. So yeah, surprise Friday diatoms. It was going to be surprise Friday mushrooms, but I had to get in before it started raining, and I rode my bike in, so it's not easy to get to the park and then leave my $2,000 bicycle just sitting out someplace where I might chain it up that somebody could just walk off with it. So I mean, it's been raining, so it's wet enough, but I might just go after the stream. I might go looking for some mushrooms. We'll see what I find, and then maybe I'll sneak in and do a little SEM stream tomorrow as well. Or I could go to the stereo microscope and do something first, and then could prep the samples for the SEM for next Wednesday. No, not Wednesday. Wednesday next week I'm going to be with science. We're going to look at ants on our stream together. So science was here a little earlier. They may have started their stream. I think they stream on Fridays. And so for next week during the normal SEM stream time, I'll be hanging out with science streams. They sent me some ants. We looked at some of them in one of my streams, but we didn't look at both sets. I think they sent me some carpenter ants that we haven't looked at all yet, and that's on Wednesday, coming up Wednesday next week. And I think we agreed that Balint would be here around 3 p.m. Eastern Time, US. So you hope I find no mushrooms next week, because you're not going to be here and you don't want to miss it. You're going to Scotland though, right? So you're going to be having fun. But if I find them, you could always watch the VODs, you know. It'll be fine. We'll find some more. But if I do find them tomorrow, will you be around tomorrow? Because maybe I could have you in the Discord while I was looking at them. Microlearning looks at mushrooms and tries to identify them on stream. And this is the external view. And usually you stream on the weekends, so, or that's when I usually see you anyway. So, are you going to be streaming this weekend, Michael? Or are you just going to be packing? And packing up your tents and stuff, because you guys are camping, right? In the wilderness with all the wild beasts. This is a Cimbella, shaped a little bit like a cymbal, where they get their name from. It has a structure that's pretty similar to Navicula in that it has lineolate striae. Same kind of striae, but it's asymmetric. And this is the raphe. It has a very unique shape to it. The ends and these, this is what's called a lateral raphe. These parts right here that look like they're kinked or bent are associated with the raphe sort of changing the tilt orientation. And so when you look at it in a light microscope, it looks like they have flipped over. But actually it's more like the opening has a slot that goes sort of like this and then tilts slightly differently. So it has a wider base and a narrower base in different areas. It's kind of cool. So the slot basically changes orientation. And then of course they have this sort of banana shape to them, symbol shape to them. And most critical for Cimbella, not just the banana shape, but also they have an apical pore field on both ends. So the striae here on the valve face are different than the striae on the valve ends. And when the raphe comes towards the apex, it curls what we call towards the dorsal side. So this is the ventral or belly side of the diatom. They don't actually have bellies, but this is the way that we treat it. Like a dolphin, it has an arched back. That's the dorsal side. And the raphe, these slots that come down in Cimbella always deflect as they reach the apex around the apical pore field, and they always deflect towards the dorsal side. So if you were looking at it and trying to figure out like, oh, I've got something that's banana shaped, how do I know what it is? In the SEM it's easy. You find the apex. If it has a apical pore field and it has a dorsiventral shape and it has a raphe that deflects towards the dorsal side, it's Cimbella. If the raphe deflects the other way towards the ventral side and it has a banana shape, it's Ensionema. Back in the day, they just treated all the Ensionema as Cimbella, and then eventually they decided that they were split into a different genus. And it turns out there's a good reason for it. They're pretty different from each other in a lot of ways, even though they both kind of have a similar outline. Generally, I can tell the difference without getting to the point where I have to look at the raphe closely, because the Cimbella shapes are all a little bit different than the Ensionema shapes to me, but that's not something people necessarily pick up right away. So I usually like to point out the features of it, and then rather than the sort of, I don't know, how the shape feels, but I can usually just tell from a fragment of something whether it's Ensionema or Cimbella. I don't need to see the raphe usually. Let's double check our focus, and then we'll take a picture of this guy. Looks good. Usually their lifestyles are a little bit different between Ensionema and Cimbella. Cimbella live attached lifestyles where they have, stuff that oozes out of the apical pore fields often and allows them to sort of sit upright or attached to a surface on one end or both ends. And Ensionema usually live in these weird little tubes. They crawl up and down, like with a colony of other Ensionema. They look like little cars in a tunnel, basically, when you see them alive. But they have very different life habits as a result. And the apical pore fields are only helpful if you actually live attached by a stalk, usually. We'll take that picture and we'll run with it. You'll be around tomorrow, yeah. You might stream tomorrow at some point. Okay. You're already packed and you're ready to go. You're ready for the haggis. Okay. The images in the slideshow, are they up on a website? Yes. The images on the slideshow are all from Instagram. So if you go to, not the bottom link is my personal photography. The top link, so if you like pictures of birds or insects or whatever, you probably will like the bottom link. The top link is actually associated with the lab. So it's SEM images and my professional sort of Instagram account. So it's almost exclusively images from the SEM or people who are using the SEM or something like that here in the lab. And almost all of those are available there, or you can go to the Discord if you want to actually like download some of the images. A lot of them I've posted into the micro art channel, and a lot of times I'll post the image to Instagram, and then I'll put the image in the Discord for people who just want to download it. If you want a really high-end, super quality version of any of the images because you think they're super cool for whatever reason, there's channel points you could spend to do that. If you sit around in the channel long enough, you'll be able to just get or request a high-quality image from me, and I can give you a very large poster-quality version of any of those images as an option. Some of them you can buy also on the Redbubble site if you're interested in buying something, but you don't necessarily need to buy anything. You can just save up channel points, leave it running in the background while you're doing something else. Save up the channel points, and then I can get you something. Any of the images that we have in the Instagram or from my personal photography collection, anything that if you wanted it, I can give you a nice high, super high quality version of it that you could use as a screensaver, desktop, phone thingy, print it out and use it as an actual poster, whatever. It'd be cool. What was I going to do? I was going to say something as well. Something to do with one of these buttons in front of me, but I can't remember which button. Oh, I was going to actually change the slides. There. So you can change the slides. I just did it for you guys. It cycles through them. Maybe it takes about a half hour or something like that, or less. So there's a lot of different slides that you could look through as well. Science! You got shouted out by Automatic, right there. Because they do art and microscope stuff and science. They're in 3 of the categories. So they probably come up frequently. Sorry, Aki, I'll get back to your questions here. Which lake in Indiana do you go to get diatoms from? Any lake, including the koi pond in my backyard. These particular samples are from the Chinook wetland, or Chinook wildlife area in Indiana. It's not far from where I live in Terre Haute. It's like halfway between here and well, it's kind of close to Brazil, I guess, Indiana. It's old strip mine pits that they filled in with water. These samples were from Shyster Pit, which is right in the main entry area to the central part of the Chinook wildlife area. And then these were from a little wetland that was just outside of the actual pit. This is collected from, I think I just called it swamp snot or something like that. It was just like metaphyton that was floating near the surface in a cloud of algae and an algal mat. And then I have another sample from duckweed that was collected from right next to it, just in the duckweed itself. So you can see the difference between like a floating algal mat and duckweed, which also floats but isn't algae. So let's hop over to that now that I've collected this image. I was threatening to do that a while ago and we just didn't do it. I think that's this sample. Yeah. So this is an example from right next to where this was collected, slightly different type of macrophytes and stuff that it was actually growing on. This is the Diatom Hanea. Earlier, our friend Hannah was here in the channel, and it's like the name Hannah. And she sings a song about our channel. I don't know how that happened, but it did. And you can actually hear that song here on her channel. And she sings it. Also, you can go in and she'll, if you request it, she'll sing it, no cost. So she's one of our close friends here on Twitch. And the Diatom song that she sings on that link is sort of like a truncated version, the early version of it, and now she has a much longer one, which includes this genus, Hanea. Oh, sorry, this is Hansia, sorry, not Hanea. But she does have one that includes Hanea, and we have looked at Hanea on stream before. Got my H diatoms messed up. This is Hansia, a type of nitsioid diatom. Hang on a second and I'll send you a link to it on the Diatoms of North American webpage, and I'll try to get back to your questions here in a second as well. This is... We got raided. How did we get raided? It's Esterella. Hello, Esterella. Look at my auto raider shout out, worked perfectly. Hope you're doing well, Estrella. I tried to come into your channel during my lunch break and hang out with you, and you were on break. That happens a lot when I come in for lunch and then you're in there already on break. What were you doing today? Our friend Estrella is an artist here on Twitch, and she does digital art, and recently she's been doing clay molds and stuff like that. She brought along with her my other good friend Little Chook, who's also a streamer here on Twitch and does art. We have a lot of art friends. So Jason, thank you for following. Jason's a regular over there in Estrella's channel. Let's see. Yeah, we were looking at some Hansia, and so I sent them the link to the Hansia guide. Doodle days. You're doing doodle requests. She also will. She's got some sort of thing where you can get her to tell us a story. She'll draw it while she's telling it. Was it a story doodle or was it just a normal doodle? You desperately want to go outside and celebrate sunny weather, so you're going to leave. That's fine. Thank you for bringing people over. Thank you for injecting us with a little chook, who clearly came along with the raid. But we're always happy. Just regular doodles. Doodles are cool. It's fine. I don't think I couldn't do doodles digitally. I feel like if I was doing it with a pen, I could do doodles. But a chook injection is just what we needed. Liven up the place with a little chook. This species that we're looking at is Hansia amphioxus, and Hansia is a specialist that edaphic diatom lives in soils. And if you were to wait around for a rainy day and then go to literally any puddle, probably where you live, I'm guessing where you live. Where I live, it's always the case. And just take a little bit of water from the puddle, like a few hours into the rain, take a little water from the puddle, stick it on a microscope and say, what the heck is in there? What you will find is Hansia and then a bunch of ciliates that will spring up from the soils. So when it rains, it carries a little bit of moisture and sediment into mud puddles, and almost always what you get are this little diatom. and they're very distinct, so you'd be able to see them pretty clearly. Octems, welcome in. Thank you for being a subscriber. You get the subscriber bell. And Broken Symmetry, thank you for being a subscriber as well. You also got the little subscriber bell. So people who subscribe and then talk get a bell the first time they come in. That's my new feature for recognizing my subscribers. So thank you for that. Hello, Bluesy, how are you doing? I'm doing good. It's Friday. My class week is over. Most of the work that I had to get done, I did last night. I stood up till, I don't know, 12:30 or something working on it. And then today came in, taught my class, got a bunch of work that I had to get done. I still have some things I haven't managed for this week, but I decided that I was ready to stop working on things. So, and I just thought, I'll just come in and do a little stream. We'll look at some diatoms, and I'm actually getting some work done while I'm here doing this. Amphioxus. Oh, Amphioxus. Sorry. Trying to spell Latin while I'm talking. Not easy. So that's a benthic diatom. Lives in soils. We didn't see any of these in the previous sample, and we didn't see any of these. This is just a different shaped navicula than the ones that we had in the other sample. And then there were some of these little guys. Those are phytoliths over here. That's a chrysophyte cyst. There were some of these guys in the sample, but they weren't very common. And this is Epithemia gibba, and it used to be Rhopalodia, now Epithemia. And they are specialists that like to live on duckweed, which is what lemna is. So this was collected from duckweed in a not a swamp, but a wetland. And I mean, there were trees around it, but not really like a swamp, not like a true swamp. So more like just a wetland, shallow water wetland. And this is Epithemia gibba, and it, like all, I think like all epithemia, has an endosymbiotic relationship with cyanobacteria. So the organism basically houses nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria. And if you don't know what that means, if the expression sounds like crazy science babble, endosymbiotic, most people know what symbiosis is. They know that's like there's two organisms that live together and they depend on each other or rely on each other. Endosymbiosis means that one organism lives inside of another. That's what endo means. So endosymbiotic means that the organisms work together, live together, and rely on each other, and one of them lives inside the other one. So in this case, the cyanobacteria lives inside the diatom, and it is a nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria. What's special about that is that nitrogen-fixing is a special type of behavior where organisms can take nitrogen gas. So most of the gas around you that you're breathing right now is nitrogen, and it's inert, and most organisms can't access it as a nutrient. Even though they need nitrogen, plants can't get nitrogen from gas at all. There are no plants that can actually acquire nitrogen from a gas state. So if it's nitrogen gas, N2, it is completely inaccessible to them, but it's all around. So, you know, it's a frustrating situation for many plants where if they need nitrogen as a nutrient, they can't get it from the air, and it also dissolves into water like all gases. So oxygen dissolves into water, carbon dioxide dissolves into water, and nitrogen gas dissolves into water, which means that not only is it all around them in the atmosphere, but it's also all around them in the water in a gaseous state, and they cannot access it. But Nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria have specialized tools, and they're the only organisms besides humans that have figured out how to take nitrogen gas. They have something called nitrogenase, which is a protein thingy, to basically convert nitrogen gas in an anaerobic environment into ammonia. And then the ammonia can be converted into nitrite and then eventually nitrate. And nitrate is something that all organisms can consume. So yes, exactly, Megatron. The nitrogen is everywhere, but it's like water. You can't drink it, you can't eat it. You can breathe it. It doesn't help you get any nutrients. So the nitrogen-fixing bacteria are cyanobacteria, are these like specialized type of cyanobacteria. And Fragillaria, still the same. Hasn't changed. It'll always be the same, Bluesy. So you just pressed it again. You can keep pressing it if you want. Enzyme, yeah. And it's got an A's ending. I just couldn't remember the word. And it can then be used by all organisms. So if you have the ability to fixate nitrogen, you're a cyanobacteria. But if you can't, you could always have a symbiotic relationship with you make friends with your cyanobacteria partner. You give them sugars and other things, protection, and they will basically make nitrogen for you out of thin air. Literally. So, yes, it's Earth Day, everybody. Happy Earth Day. We should be celebrating Earth Day because that's where I keep all of my stuff. It's my favorite planet. It's the only one I've ever been to be honest. And our daily diatom. Somebody's got all the buttons going, Bluesy. Our daily diatom today is Stephanodiscus. That is Stephanodiscus yellowstonensis, which is a endemic species that only lives in Yellowstone Lake in Yellowstone National Park. And I have many colleagues who study Stephanodiscus yellowstonensis. Doki Doki Baka. Did the water bear successfully shed its exoskeleton? No. I came back and checked it around 1 in the morning. It still had not shed its exoskeleton. It still had not completed its molt. And then I let the sample just dry up on the stub. And I figured that maybe it could find its way out of it eventually, but it's going to have to do it not on my microscope slide. So I then took the dry material and I put it back in with the rest of the lichen stuff, and then I dumped it out in the yard, so it is free. It may survive, it may find a way out of its molt, but it spent the better part of like 4 hours trying to get itself out of the top end of that molt, and I don't think it ever happened. It didn't while I was watching, so it may have lived. It may also not have lived. It may still be imprisoned in its own skin, like many of us, I guess. This is Epithemia gibba. So to answer that question, no. It's a tragic end, potentially, to be the point where you're basically ready to move on to the next size class and then to get stuck that way forever, because you can't figure out how to get out of your skin. It's also a consequence of not growing eyes, probably, and being aware of your surroundings, I suppose. But not a happy ending yet. And I thought it might be better if I just went ahead and sent our little cat to a farm upstate, wink wink, rather than spending a lot of time dwelling on whether or not it's ever going to get out of its molt, because we can't help it. There's no way for us to facilitate the molting process. It's pretty much up to the water bear to figure it out, and they're going to do it whether I watch or don't. So unfortunately, not while we were able to watch. I would have been much happier if we had a success story somehow in there, but nature is cruel, and it does not care how cute you are, or how many people are watching, apparently. or even how many subscriptions they give me. Because I guess somebody was trying to get it to go by giving me a subscription. It doesn't care. You're either successful or you aren't. And that water bear, at least while we were watching, wasn't successful. So, yeah. I'm glad we didn't just sit there and stare at it for the next 4 hours or whatever while we were waiting for it to happen. Because I feel like it got a little bit like, you know, like I said, it's tough watching things struggle. And after a while, I was kind of like, I can't take it anymore. I can't watch it. I need to, like, just let it go. And maybe it will find its way out. If I keep watching it and then it dies struggling inside of its skin, then I know for sure that bad things happened. And I couldn't do anything about it. So it's better if we just let it figure itself out and, you know. But it's not a happy update. Sorry. We'll do some more water bear watching sometime next week, probably. I still have a lot of spare time in my schedule, and maybe even a little bit more spare time next week. So I've been streaming just a little bit more frequently than I always have been this semester. And then I only have we only have 1 week before finals. And so once the finals week gets here, I'm free for a couple of weeks. I don't have any classes, and I can do whatever I want at that point. That sound, that dinging sound, is just glorious. Who has entered the chat now? Who has a subscriber who's arrived? Disillusioned. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for being a subscriber here. You get the bell now. I installed subscriber bell so that we know important people have arrived in the channel and they're here to chat with us. It only works when you talk, so welcome in. We're looking at diatoms. We sometimes look at diatoms on this channel, and today's one of those days. This is not a normal stream time for me, but I wasn't going to let that deter me. I have some images I need to collect of diatoms from this field trip, and I just wanted to get more than I had on Wednesday. So, Dodo Ab, how about putting nitrogen-fixing enzymes into corn or whatever? People can put in the roots of some plants. They can have a symbiotic relationship. So, like alder, for example, is a tree that grows. Is it alder? I think it's alder. It has a tree that grows in its root. It has like a special place for nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria. Yeah, you can always just keep hitting it. It's fine if you want to remember. It's not a big deal. Yeah, Earth is definitely the best planet. It has dinosaurs. That's a good point. None of the other planets have dinosaurs. It's going to be Esrael's new name, Stephanodiscus. If she were disc-shaped, we could do that. I don't know. Oh, I see what you mean, Dodo. Do you mean have they genetically engineered corn to nitrogen fix? I don't think they can. I don't think that's something that you can just do transgenetically. But I could be wrong. I don't know the science on that very well. Existential dread sets in. You can get out of your skin, but it's not a happy ending. Yeah, that's true. Unlike the water bear, which it would have been a happy ending had they escaped. It had performance problems. You know. Am I not free every day? No, I work most days. Yeah, alder's nitrogen fixing. Thank you, Maiko. It doesn't live in nitrogen-rich dirt. It makes the dirt rich in nitrogen because it has a nitrogen fixing cyanobacteria in its root. Yeah. Yeah, happy Earth Day. I forgot. I should have put that in the title, probably. Probably should have had something like Happy Earth Day. Maybe some people don't celebrate it, though. You know, maybe there's some people out there just anti-Earth people. And I don't want to offend them, I guess. So I don't know why they hate it, why they hate Earth so much, but you know, I don't want to be on their bad side, whoever they are. Gompphonema, that's what this is. I just put SP because I don't know which one. This is a really spectacular one, actually. Still has C-shaped areolae. Here's the stigma. There's the raphe. Head pole, foot pole. All the main characteristics as we know them for Gompphonema. But I don't remember seeing this one. It's pretty nice. This thing looks like a eunotia. We didn't see any eunotia in the other sample either, but they more commonly occur in bogs and swamp-like settings or marsh settings. That's a eunotia for sure. And if Anna is still here in the channel, she probably could tell us which one she likes eunotia. They're confusing to me, as they are to many diatomists. This is the, by the way, this is an internal view of a different epithemia. Right here, you can see the stripes on it. Those ridges are costy. Pretty intricate. It looks like somebody made a waffle out of a diatom. A fancy waffle. It has a piece of junk on it and also has a diatom on it, so I'm going to try to find a different one. One that's not covered with junk. This is an internal view of a Gompphonema. It's like in the Parvulum group. Got some sort of Parvulum-like Gompphonema. Very common Gompphonema. There's a whole bunch of them. There's one there. There's one over here. You can see how many. These are all Epithemia gibba. All of these. This one, 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 this one. And then this is that same Gompphonema we just looked at and imaged. Not the same individual, but the same species. So here's one here, here's one here, in a girdle view or slightly girdle view, and then a lot of Gompphonema, Parvulum, or the Parvulum-like Gompphonema that's here. Those are the most common things that we see. So if I were to guess where we were, just from looking at the sample, the fact that it's covered with a bunch of Epithemia gibba suggests to me that we're in something that has a lot of macrophytes nearby. All the Gomphonemas usually live on either plants or rocks. So again, these ones probably were living directly on the duckweed that I collected this material from. And so we have, you know, pretty much what I would expect to find, although you get different groups of organisms living in an area, you know, depending on the conditions. So you don't always know exactly which species you might find, but these are the kind of genera that I would expect to find in this setting. So pretty normal. All these little round things that you're seeing here are chrysophyte stomatocysts, which they use to persist through the winter, usually, in many environments and temperate regions. This thing that looks like somebody knocked off the end of a hedge cutter is a phytolith, and it's a really spectacular set of bilobate-like phytoliths. So phytoliths form as silica is implanted into the cells between plants or between the cells of plants. It can be either one, and so they're like an impression of what's left when the cells aren't present, or sometimes between where the cells are, and plants will use them to give them a little bit more rigidity. Some people think they might be for defense from being grazed, but this is just like a piece of silica But this is actually kind of a spectacular one. So I'm going to rotate it a little, and we'll take a picture of it. My current postdoc, Dr. Yost, Dr. Chad Yost, is here at Indiana State, and some good news, we're going to hire him as a tenure-track professor next year. So he'll no longer be a postdoc in my lab, but rather a professor in our department who will have his own lab. He currently already has his own lab, but formally he won't be under my supervision in any way, which is really kind of a happy story, because I'm friends with him, and we've been colleagues and worked on a lot of stuff together. And then I was, he was still getting his PhD, but through most of the time that we've been working together. But now we're colleagues and we work in the same department, or we will. Very cool. Happy story. Not very many professors are getting hired these days. And he's a great teacher. He's got a lot of cool research, and a lot of his stuff overlaps with, not exactly with what I do, but like he looks at terrestrial environments and plants that live in terrestrial environments, and then their records are preserved in lake sediments. So I look at lake organisms that live in lake systems and leave a record in lake systems, and they're siliceous, and he looks at these things, which are basically the remnants of plants on the landscape. And so if we wanted to say like temperatures got cooler or wetter or drier or whatever, having a record of what was going on in the landscape as well as in the lake is kind of a great combination. So we work together as teams, but I don't know most of the things that he knows, and he doesn't know most of the things I know. So what got you interested in studying diatoms, and how long have you been studying diatoms? I think you asked me that question, but I missed it earlier, Aki. I started studying diatoms in 2020. I went to diatom training camp for my PhD. It's like not a training camp, but a summer course, and they teach you diatom taxonomy. I learned from Dr. Eugene Stormer is a very famous diatom taxonomist who trained most of the diatom taxonomists in North America, came through his lab. And I wasn't in his lab, but I did take that class with him as my instructor. And then the TA for the course was, there were two TAs. It was Sarah Spalding and Mark Edlund, who are now my colleagues. And I work a lot with Mark, and occasionally I work with Sarah on projects that that we do together. They're more like, I'm more like a paleoecologist. Mark and I basically do the same thing, but he's a little bit more of a taxonomist who does paleoecology, and I'm more like a paleoecologist who does some taxonomy. And then Sarah is more of a taxonomist, and occasionally she does some paleo stuff. So. But she's more like taxonomically oriented. So I work with people who are a little bit more taxonomically oriented, who are more taxonomists, because sometimes I need their help, but sometimes we just do different things, and so it overlaps very well. And I got interested in studying diatoms because I was already a geologist. I had a master's degree. I was working at the USGS in DC. And I was working on a project in Florida Bay looking at micro mollusks. And I was really just like a lab technician. I would get together the field gear, I helped out with the field work, and did a bunch of microscope prep material, rinsing samples and prepping samples. And I didn't really do the analysis side. I had a scientist that I was working with there. And we were working in Florida Bay, and a diatomist started working in the team with us. And I started talking to them about, like, I didn't want to work in the marine realm. I wanted to work in terrestrial systems, and I was trying to find some tool that would be useful in terrestrial systems. And I hadn't really heard of diatoms before that point. And So I started talking with my friend Jackie Huvane, who's a diatomist, who was working on that project, and about what kind of things you could do with diatoms. And there's a lot of interest in integrating diatoms into the work because they're super powerful ecological indicators. They can tell you things like water quality, water temperature, the depth, the lights, the nutrients, like anything you'd want to know something about. There's probably some combination of diatom assemblages that would be useful for that information. So I was looking for something that I could use as a person who might study lakes in terrestrial settings, and the choices were like pollen, which I wasn't interested in because I didn't want to handle HF, hydrofluoric acid, and ostracods, which I was partially interested in, but I thought maybe there might be some better tools because anytime the pH gets below about 8 or something, ostracods aren't useful anymore. So there's a pretty small subset of lakes that get limited by that. So I wanted something that was a little bit more expansive. I would have been okay with ostracods if I'd end up going into looking at those. But having met somebody who studied diatoms, I started looking at them and I thought they were really intricate and interesting and charismatic and powerful. And it was actually their utility that probably was the most appealing to me. But also they're better looking than ostracods and pollen. That stuff looks like, looks okay. But diatoms are much more charismatic and have, generally speaking, more utility. So then ostracods are pretty good, but they have this sort of limit in terms of where they live. So they're usually benthic, and they usually live in elevated alkalinities. So they're a nice complement to diatoms, by the way. I'm not trying to trash on ostracods because diatoms actually are in the rest of the spectrum, kind of go up to about pH of 10 or 11, and ostracods do really well from like 8 to 11 or 12 or 13, but diatoms start to dissolve when you get above pHs of 9. So the fossil record usually isn't present. Phytolith. So that's how I got interested in diatoms, and how long I've been looking at them. Those are good questions. As a background. Ostracods look like jelly beans to me, so I think they're cute, but ornate jelly beans versus what I'm looking at, I think maybe they're, But there's also many fewer species of ostracods. There's, currently countless numbers of species of diatoms. Estimates are something like 1 million, 2 million, we don't know. Quite high numbers of diatoms, and ostracods don't have those kinds of numbers. So it adds to their utility the more species you have, because it means that they specialize in different niches, probably. And so there's a link between those things that makes sense. Like if you have organisms that live in more types of environments and can specialize because they have a wider range of species, then they probably can tell you more direct information about the environment. So people have also started doing all kinds of cool things with diatoms, looking at their shell chemistry, which is something people have done with ostracods for a long time, and looking for stable isotopes, and now ancient DNA has started to take on its own life, looking for diatoms through their ancient DNA, which might be preserved in some lake records for quite a long time, potentially hundreds of thousands of years, potentially even millions of years of ancient DNA, although it degrades. Some of it gets preserved in lake systems for quite a while. So those are realms that are outside of mine, where people have sort of expanded. I mostly do taxonomy and paleoecology, and so I look at the skeletons. I'm more of a paleontologist than a biologist. Okay, I'm going to take this picture of this navicula, I don't know what the species is. It's a weird one to me. But Dodo Abob, do I look at river diatoms? Yes, we look at river diatoms. We have had several students who have come through my lab who have tried to look at the Wabash River to look at different consequences of river diatoms. And I have a project that I'm going to try to implement this summer with some of my students that are going to be undergrads that are doing research with me as summer research projects, where I want to try to collect diatoms along the length of a river. So people have looked at them for water quality. They look at diatoms to try to figure out like what's the river conditions like. What I'd really like to do is look at as you move from the headwaters of a river to the foot of a river, toe of a river, what do you want to call it, how do diatoms change? People have done this a lot with macroinvertebrates like insects and insect larvae. And there's a pretty distinct progression associated with something called the river continuum concept, where the headwaters are filled with woody debris and there's more shadow in those areas because there's trees over the river systems and they're smaller, so the streams are usually these little trickles, and so you get different types of insects that live in that kind of a system than you get that live in like the widest part of the Mississippi River. So, which tends to be a little bit more muddy and grassy and less trees. And so people have looked at this concept of how fish and aquatic insects have changed as you move down the river system. But I don't know that anybody's ever tried to characterize, and macrophytes as well, but I don't think people have ever looked at diatoms quite this way before, where you look at how the river system changes and then look at how the diatoms change as you move through that system. So I'm going to try to do that, and it's sort of exploration, but science is often exploration. So maybe it'll work, maybe it'll be cool, maybe we'll see something interesting, but we'll probably need to look at more than one river system in order to find a trend. So, and then we also probably want to characterize the other things that we're finding. So we might have to do it, like a combination, looking at the macrophyte and macroaquatic insects and the diatoms at the same time. I think it would make for a really interesting, starter project, and then we'll see how it goes. One problem with river systems, if you're looking at diatoms, is that there's a lot more diverse habitats in river systems than there are in a lake system, just by the nature of rivers being a little bit shallower and having fast-flowing water, slow-flowing water, areas that are muddier, areas that are clearer, areas that are dominated by dissolved organic matter, areas that are dissolved by particulate organic matter. And so there's a lot of different types of habitats associated with a river system, and there are, there's a range of stuff in lake systems, but they don't generally have that kind of diversity. And so river systems tend to be a little bit more like junk piles, where there's just like a large collection of things, and also stuff gets ripped up from one environment and gets carried into another environment, because river systems are transient and they're always flowing from one place to another. And so it creates a lot of difficulty in trying to interpret, like if I collect something, what does it represent in that environment? Is it everything above it or just what's there, right? Because some of it's going to get trapped from the flowing system that it's in. So it's an interesting question, and it's one I want to sort of explore. And so I just need to get some undergrad students who are interested in chasing, some crazy idea around with me. And sometimes I get really cool, ideas like this that I think students will like, and then, we get some interesting results. So hopefully that's the case for this as well. And then if it works out and it seems to show a nice trend or an interesting pattern, then maybe I'll write it in a subprint. Maybe it'll be the next big project that I work on, where we try to look at this, from a funded approach, rather than something where I'm funding it with money from Twitch and a little bit of cash from the department or whatever. So we'll see. I saw something kind of weird down here. This thing? know what that is. Maybe a Eunotia. It's hard to tell. It's like a weird little stick diatom, stick-shaped diatom. The diversity in this sample is actually substantially lower than the diversity in the previous samples that we were looking at, because here we're looking at stuff that was just growing on duckweed. But you can find some of the things that we saw on the other system here. This, for example, a long skinny thing that we're looking at, some sort of Fragillaria, it looks like. It's Bluesy's spirit guide genus. Some sort of Fragillaria. This little thing that we passed on the way here. Some tiny little Acanthidium belonging to the Minutissima group. Most of the chrysophytes that I'm seeing are kind of boring ones. That just look like little orbs with an opening on one side. Sometimes they have all kinds of crazy reticulated surfaces and spines and all kinds of weird stuff sticking off of them, bladed like structures that move around that are on the surface, sort of wrapping around them. So they look a little bit like Christmas ornaments to me, with sometimes really pretty designs. But all the ones that I've seen in this set have been kind of boring, simple, you know, either egg-shaped ones that don't have a lot of character, or just round with an opening. I have some samples from Cumber's Bog that has just bunch of round things. From Cumber's Bog that's just filled with chrysophytes, and every one of them is just like crazy looking, spines and blades and fins and things poking off of them in crazy directions, and the diversity is kind of stunning. That's a more traditional bog-like environment where those are, so that's probably the reason. Okay, I'm gonna just spin around real quick and take a look at sample 3, which is the one that we ended on from the other stream, and we didn't look at this yet on this stream, but you can see here's some of the same things that we saw in the wetland environment, some chrysophytes, some cymbellas, some of the Rhopalodia. There's also a lot of these stick-shaped things that are in here, I think are Fragillaria all over the place in the sample, and some Navicula. So there's a Navicula, for example, some more Nitzias and other things. The diversity is a little bit higher here. This sample's from a boat ramp, so just like a algal mat that was floating in a boat ramp, adjacent to, it was easy access, let me just put it that way. Like I could get to it easily. I didn't have to go walking into the water to get the sample. So that was my motivation for picking it. I could see some algae from where I was, and I could reach it with a stick or with my hands. So but Naviculas, a lot of the same things that we saw. There's sets of these Fragillaria everywhere as well, that weren't in the other sample, but they tend to occur in metaphyton a little bit more frequently. So these things that are in clumps or clusters or groups here are probably all Fragillaria. They sure look like it. I should probably get some pictures of them because they're actually quite common in the sample. That's a nice charismatic assemblage of them from all the different angles. So let's try to get this into focus. Good enough. And I'll recenter it. and slow the beam down. So this is nice because we have a girdle view, a side view of the diatom here, a 3/4 view of the diatom here, and then a valve view of the same diatom. So we have basically all the different dimensions of the diatom in one field of view with all different, all of them with the whole girdle bands here visible. There's a, this one's like a weird combination. There's like a valve and a girdle together, but we have all of the different angles for the diatom, so we can actually see all the different sides, which is pretty nice. There's a bunch of clay down here with the diatom stuck in it as well. So I'm going to collect that. I can see what chat's been talking about, if anything. 5 viewers and frames. If I want to become famous, I don't want to be famous. We had this conversation before. I don't want to be famous. Why would I want to be famous? What does that got to do? Let's see. Delete message. I could follow my dreams of glitz and glamour, have people dig through my trash. You know, all things I don't want. No. No thanks. What's my favorite class to teach? Oh, that's a good question. I teach a bunch of classes. So it depends on, you know, what... I like the Lakes and Wetlands class. I really like teaching about lakes. I also teach a paleolimnology class, which I really like. I teach a class called Quaternary Paleoecology, which is another class that I really like to teach. So I actually have a lot of classes that I really enjoy teaching. It's kind of hard to just pick one, but I would say that the ones that deal with lakes. I also teach a couple of really interesting classes for graduate students. One is called Large Lake Systems, where we look at very large lakes. You know, the Great Lakes, East African lakes, Baikal, Biwa, all the really, you know, enormous ones, because they have a sort of their own distinct species and unique kind of systems. And then I also teach a class called Extreme Aquatic Environments, where we just look at all the extreme systems, you know, super high UV systems and, you know, cave systems where it's mostly dark, and hyper-eutrophic systems, systems that have really high pH or low pH, or high salinity or low salinity, or very hot conditions or very cold conditions. Because there's a lot of really interesting aspects to that class where you can look at extremophiles and polyextremophiles, and I feel like it comes into play with a lot of what I am interested in scientifically about many of these organisms that I kind of look at in the microscope. So for me, all those classes are really a lot of fun. When I was being interviewed, they asked me which class did I want to teach the most, and I think it was Large Lake Systems is the one that I really wanted to teach. Now I've taught it like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, because there's really just nothing like that out there, where you could have a class on just these specialized systems that are very interesting and have long histories, mostly, and endemic species, and, you know, just like everything you could want. They don't behave like a typical lake system, and there's a lot of really interesting literature. You could just lump it together with the normal lakes class, but I feel like there's enough there that that is substantial and interesting and unique to these lake systems that it easily can be an entire course. And so that's what I wanted, and that's what I did. I made an entire course based on these extreme aquatic environments. They could be marine, they could be freshwater, they could be anything. And so it's a fun class to teach. We talk about a bunch of really interesting organisms, ranging from the marine realm all the way over to modern systems. And I talk a little bit about ancient Earth in it as well, so it can kind of tie in paleontological aspects of it, which I think is a nice benefit for me. And it gives students a slightly different perspective on what is an extreme environment, because what we think of as being extreme today probably is not what was extreme a billion years ago, or in particular 3 billion years ago, when the atmosphere of planet Earth didn't have any oxygen. So, you know, things that we think of as like normal conditions for us today, because we have 20% roughly oxygen in our atmosphere, there's you know, there's a pretty distinct difference between that and you know, the way it was back then. Oxygen was a poison, it was a toxin, and most organisms would die if they were exposed to it. So because it was a byproduct of things that we didn't need, or life didn't need oxygen, basically, at that point. And now it's hard for us to imagine life without oxygen, right? So it's a really interesting transition for people to think about, like, what do we consider extreme? Why do we think it's extreme? But anoxic environments are what we consider to be extreme conditions today on planet Earth. They're places where organisms don't usually live, and they have to have special adaptations usually to live in those conditions. So I think that makes it pretty interesting just as a thing to talk about, to discuss with students, and to think of as a thought experiment for a class. So I really like that class. But it's hard to pick. It's like saying, like, which one of your kids is the favorite, because I put a lot of effort into my classes, and even the classes where it's the students sort of driving a lot of the discussion because they have to pick papers and lead discussions and that sort of thing. I don't just sit there. I am pretty engaged in the conversations. So hopefully the students like the courses. I think most of the students tell me that they do, but you can never tell, right? So the dorsiventral structure, then the apical pore field is present, and the raphe deflects towards the dorsal side. So this is a cymbella, and as a bonus, it has a stigma, which is this little pore down here at the bottom, and lineolate striae, the other characteristics that we defined as being common for cymbella. So very good. If you did your river study along the length of it, would you collect water or mud or something else each place to get diatoms? Yes, water. So I have a plankton net. We would probably collect some plankton. I think it'd be more interesting not to look at the plankton, but I think it'd also be hard to just reject it because we have a tool that can collect plankton. And then I would look at plant material, so we'd have to have some variety of substrates, probably plant, wood, and bare sediment. So those are the things I think we would probably aim for, Dodo. Trying to find some relationship between what are we seeing present in the environment and the substrates that are available. So probably in like headwaters you'd get more wood and leaves, so we'd need to have those environments sampled, see what's growing there and living there, because there's going to be a substrate effect as well. So, and there is with, you know, the aquatic invertebrates as well, the macroinvertebrates. You know, there's a substrate effect. So the different types of insects in river systems, they eat different ways, as scrapers and collectors and whatever. And so there's a substrate effect that really is sort of critical. And we would have to document the substrates that we find and then what we find on those substrates. And then we would move down the river and basically along the length of it, we would probably have several samples from headwater areas that eventually became, you know, tributary components, and then maybe some pieces that are connected to the larger river systems as well. But you'd have to have some way of monitoring the kinds of organisms and the type of microenvironment that they're in if you're looking for a genetic relationship between them or some component that would link them. Craig says, if we had a public sample application, the phone studies could request samples from crowdsourced to gather data along the length of the river. Yeah. You know, I could just ask people to do it, and you know, like a public science, citizen science sort of approach would be one way to handle it, and that might actually be a really interesting way to integrate outreach into the science itself. But I think for a starter project, I want to have control over all those aspects. And I think if we want to incorporate the public, I don't want to have that at the very beginning of it. I want to at least make sure that we're doing the right things and we can observe a pattern. And then, you know, maybe when we take it up to the next level to upscale it, we might need to do something like that. It's a lot of work to analyze all those samples. If you think about, like, each sample is going to require probably many hours of analysis, and then I don't know how far we would want to space them along the length, so there's still some thinking about how to approach the problem that I need to do, but I feel like just getting a handle on it from testing it with the students who are, you know, they're just working on whatever for the summer as a project, is a good way to sort of scaffold up to something a little bit bigger that we could, you know, we could try on a larger scale. Really big river system would be a challenge. You know, if it was like the Mississippi River or the Missouri River or the Ohio River, I think it would be, I would need funding and like many students working on it at the same time to do something like that. So that's a, you know, pipe dream sort of a concept for what we would do. But I think you could start with something small and look for the relationship and at least document what we find, and then from there kind of build up to a more substantial kind of a project that that would require like more investment from somebody to get us to the point where we could actually look at as a concept how well it works overall. So I just want to start on it and see where it leads. So, and then if it's interesting, you know, that's fine. I feel like I probably could just ask some of my diatomist colleagues about trying to collect samples, because many of them work in river systems. So they might be able to just get me material that they have already collected, and then, you know, but not with the same purpose. So I feel like that it's going to be, some of it's going to need to be like designed around that. So I don't want any set of rivers. I want to have one specific river system with a pretty close link to these substrates to start. So but sometimes it's fun just to tinker around with ideas and see where they lead, and see if somebody, it's also possible somebody has tried it before and maybe in starting to explore it a little bit, I'll figure out that somebody's already got this information. Probably haven't done it locally, but maybe somebody also thought, why don't we try this? So it would be worthwhile to explore that. Oh, look at those C's. This is Gomphanema acuminatum, or something very close to it. We saw this also when we were streaming on Wednesday. But this is a nice sample of it. Again, you can see wrapped around the apex, it has sort of a crown shape to it, and then hips, if you like, in the foot. This is the diatom that my students had dubbed Sexy Lady Diatom, because it's curvy, I guess. So it's easy for them to remember if they give it some funny name. But I think this will make a nice image. Okay, I'm gonna actually take a longer image, and we'll probably stop here. I feel like I got enough images of these things, and I'm ready for a break. So I'm going to image this thing, and I'm going to do it at a higher resolution and a lower beam intensity and a slower speed, and I think it's going to be fine. And then I'll probably colorize this one and post it to Instagram. That's a pretty image of that diatom. So perfect. Glass can cause the greenhouse effect too. Do diatoms suffer from the greenhouse effect? I've never thought about this. Swobu. I need to think about that answer a little bit. So, like, you're talking about heat getting trapped inside the cell, and most of the diatoms, when they're living, have pigments that are absorbing some of that energy, and on purpose, and for growing. I'm not sure if the temperature inside of a diatom would be substantially higher than the temperature outside of a diatom, but they do have to repair their DNA from damage from UV light and from exposure to UV light. So maybe. And maybe the glass actually protects them a little bit from UV light. I don't know. I'll have to think about it. That's actually a really good question. A really thoughtful question. So, Aki, what do I do with all these images? Well, some of them go into publication. Some of them just go onto the Instagram site. But I'm also building a giant collection of stuff that I will probably ultimately share with the Diatoms of North America website, the diatoms.org, this one that I use, for a public resource for scientists. So I think that's my ultimate goal, is also to work with them a little bit, because they don't have a lot of SEM images, and to warehouse my SEM images on their site when we're done with them. But most of the stuff I share with the public, and I try to find a way to make it so that you know, I'm a bit of an ambassador for science, and I view my job as to try to draw attention to the field and the things that I'm interested in studying. And so I share my images on Twitter, I share them on Instagram, I give away the images that I collect, you know, if it's something that I'm not working on describing new species. So, and those eventually get published, and then once it's published, I probably will colorize those and share them, because I can colorize them and share them, and then I'm still allowed to share those images. But I'm not hoarding them, if that's what you're wondering. I'm trying to use them for educational purposes for my classes. In this case, this is stuff that we're collecting directly for my class for students so they can see what diatoms look like. And these are samples that either they collected or I collected while I was right next to them, so they can see the diatoms that are in their samples without, with an SEM basically. So they make neat calendars, yeah. So I do have a calendar. Somebody asked me about my calendars earlier today. I do have a calendar store, and I do take some of the pictures and turn them into calendars. So we made new calendars for this year, and I do sometimes do that. And I probably will make another set for next year. I have, like I said, I had a student in my lab who was like, "Oh, there's calendars?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have calendars." All the money for everything that we do here in the channel just gets donated back to the lab to pay for student research. So the subscriptions that people generously provide so they can have the emotes and the bell sounds and whatever else I do for subscribers, all that comes back to the students and or the stream. I don't take any of that money home, or rather I take it home because I have to pay taxes on it, and then I just use it to buy things that we need in the lab, or use it to help pay for student research. So it's not for profit. So if you buy something at the Redbubble store, the calendar store, or if you donate something here on Twitch or subscribe, it's not going to my salary. I mean, I have to pay taxes on it, but I use it to buy stuff for the lab and use it to help pay for students to do research or provide them with resources for research. So yeah, so that's my little blurb for that. Thanks for bringing up the calendars, little Chook. And also thanks for hanging out with us, little Chook. If you haven't followed little Chook, if you weren't convinced by my comment, you should definitely check out little Chook. Give her a follow, and she's going to start teaching us Latin on Twitch while she draws. So I don't know how you could get any better than that. So today we had follows from Jason Foy, came over with Esraella's raid, which we also had. That was very nice. We had Michael Learning, who was here visiting as a subscriber, gave a gift subscription to Aki, our new viewer. A follow from Matt Shandy, thank you for that. So we're pretty calm, chill afternoon stream, and again, a bit of a surprise because I wasn't planning on it, and I don't normally stream at this time. Well, I stream at this time, but not on this day usually. But maybe a little bit more frequent streaming from me in the near future. We'll see. Once schedule gets a little bit clearer from classes, how things go. So we're at 2,801 followers today, which is pretty good. We've crossed over the 2,800 viewer threshold. So thanks people for hanging out. And then this is the point in the stream where I try to find some place to send us. I like to end my streams with a raid. What? Don't talk at me. And we have a number of choices, of course. Music choices and science choices and art choices. And I think today we will go raid our friend GeoJim 2006. We haven't given GeoJim a raid before because I don't usually stream on Friday. And the other day he was talking about Diatoms on his channel, and Michael Learning raided him, and I came in with her raid and then flustered him a bit by talking about Diatoms at him while he was trying to talk about Diatoms. But surprise, here we are. We will send you in to attack GeoJim in a raid, and just blast him with all the emotes you have, whether they have diatoms or not, and then we'll steal all of his treats and candy and cookies and fruits and nuts, and then when we're done pillaging, we'll take away some knowledge, hopefully, as well, I guess. All right. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. As always, friends, it's nice to see you here in the chat with me. I'd probably just spend the whole day chatting to myself, even if you weren't here, but you guys ask better questions than I ask of myself usually. And so thanks for hanging out. Right? Let's do it. Let's go raid.